Please take a second, pause the video, and read this disclaimer. What's going on, guys? Today I'm taking a look at an article titled The Effects of Band-Resisted Abduction on Muscle Activity Between the Barbell Hip Thrust and the Barbell Glute Bridge. This was done at Texas A&M by Derek Kennedy, Jeffrey Casebolt, Gene Ferrin, and Michelle Bartlett. Now, long story short, what were they asking? They were asking, hey, if we put a band, a resistance band, around the knees and we have people do this fundamental motion, laying on your back, bridging and bringing the hips up and off of the ground and back down, which this would be a hip bridge, right? And the difference between a hip bridge and then a hip thrust would be my back would be supported by a bench or by a table or by something. They were asking if we put the band around the knees, do we recruit the glute med more? Now, the question, or the reason why they're asking that question is because then you could knock out two birds with one stone, but you can put a band around the knees, do a hip bridge, do a glute thrust, and then bada bing, bada boom, you've got more glute med activation while also activating your glute max. For those of you who don't know real quick, your glute med is the muscle in your hip that's responsible for doing this motion right here. We call it the good old-fashioned clamshell. It's one of them doing this, right? So doing external rotation of the hip, also doing abduction. That's another thing that the glute med does. Your glute max is really good for doing extension. So what they're asking is putting the band around the knees, having athletes do this motion of hip thrust, does it recruit the glute med more? And the answer to their question is no. No, it doesn't. I'm going to read you here from their discussion. Mean outcomes, which produced a large effect size, meaning it's, measurable enough, it's large enough that it's notable, it's not like it's minute and it's barely there, demonstrated that the band-resisted barbell hip thrust, remember that the hip thrust would be the one on an elevated surface, elicited a greater muscle activity of the glute max than the normal barbell hip thrust. And the band-resisted barbell glute bridge elicited a significantly greater muscle activity of the glute max than the normal barbell glute bridge. Meaning this band around the knees doing those motions led to an over-recruitment of the glute max compared to the normal activity. Meaning that if I take this band off, I lay on my back and I do a hip bridge versus me laying on my back and doing this with it now, like this, I'm actually recruiting more of my glute max with the band around my knees, which should be impacting my glute med, than if I did it without it. Which is craziness, because for the longest time in the clinic and probably in people's personal training, we thought that putting the band around the knees and making you do that motion would actually lead to you using your glute med while using your glute max. It's a great 2-for-1 exercise. It lets me hit two different muscle groups simultaneously, saving me time and allowing the patient to build a better mind-muscle connection with their hips and also prepare them for more vigorous activity. And the truth is, what we've just found out from at least what Texas A&M is claiming is no. Doing that motion actually over-recruits the glute max. Now you might be wondering, between the two of them, which one recruited the glute max more? The hip thrust or the glute bridge? Great question. The answer, let me see here, looks to be that it was the glute bridge. Having your back on the ground seems to be what leads to a greater activation of the glute max than if you have it resting on the back of a table or a bench. Meaning doing a good old-fashioned hip bridge from the ground actually yields better glute max activation. Now, with all this in mind, so what, right? Why is this happening? Well, one of the reasons that they hypothesize it's happening is what's called reciprocal inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition is where you have an agonist. Let's say my arm here is the muscle group we're talking about. The agonist would be the bicep as it pulls towards, and my tricep would be the antagonist, because as I do bicep flexion, my bicep is working, it's my tricep that's having to relax. So they say reciprocal inhibition is a hypothetical relationship between the agonist and antagonist muscle groups that suggests that a balance between muscle length and strength must be maintained to avoid inhibition of the agonist muscle group. Meaning, if I understand them right, that you have to maintain the balance of length and stress, which they call the muscle length tension, which we all know, or we should all know, look it up if you don't, to maintain inhibition of the agonist muscle, meaning that if you get something that's so tight that you can't flex right, you're being limited by the opposite. So if I'm trying to bicep flex, my tricep is so tight, I'm being inhibited by the tricep to even do bicep flexion. The other one that they're talking about is synergistic dominance. That is the increased reliance on another primary class agonist muscle group due to weakness or restriction of the predominant primary class. Put in English, you got your primary mover, right? So if you have one muscle group that does elbow flexion, for example, bicep curl, right? You got your bicep, it's the primary muscle that does that, but you also have the brachioradialis and the brachialis that help with that. Those would be two second-class agonists in this case, right? They're two helpful muscles that do the same action as the primary muscle that we're trying to target. So they argue that what's happening here is the glute max is compensating on behalf of the glute med, which is overloaded, to then do increased hip extension. So when we look here, when reciprocal inhibition is presented, neuromuscular dysfunction is hypothesized to occur, triggering a movement syndrome, often associated with a muscular imbalance, leading to alterations in neuromuscular activity surrounding the joint. Big picture, something's going on there. You have a dysrhythm, so your body says, hey, I sense something is going wrong in the movement. Fire up the ones that are reliable that I know I can use. I'm sensing some dysfunction going on over here with this muscle group, so we can't rely on that. Pour all of the extra energy we have into the muscles that we know we can rely on. It's kind of like when you're watching Star Trek and he goes, put more power to the shields, downgrade it from the weapons. Okay, weapons aren't working, we can't blast the aliens, put it in the shields quick, because we need to be able to absorb things. Your body's trying to find a way to accomplish a task, and it's saying, this isn't working, activate more nerves here to get this to work. So what? Using a band when doing hip bridging or glute thrusts is more effective at getting glute max activation than without it, which means for me in the clinic as a physical therapist, using this on my patients, I can now increase the amount of glute activation they're gonna have by doing a hip bridge, by using the band. And I can use that targetedly, knowing that, hey, maybe their hip abductors are crazy strong. I wanna overload that glute max. I'm gonna use this band in order to force them to use that glute max even more for a therapeutic goal of strengthening it. And for everybody else out there that's exercising, this just means, hey, using a band around the knees while doing glute bridge or hip thrust is just going to get you even better activation of those glute maxes. Thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, check out the website. Keep your eyes peeled for the app, which should be coming out sooner or later. Now everybody stay fit, stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will catch you all in the next video.